Welcome to Fables of Our Deconstruction, a podcast where we examine our systems of faith and culture together as we grow as people. I'm your host, Dylan. If you like what you hear, check me out at patreon.com/Dylan. If you'd like to be on a future episode, leave me a message at 515-318-7569 or find Fables of Our Deconstruction on Anchor FM and leave me a voice message. Leave your name, otherwise I will keep you anonymous. Let's get into this. Alright, so it has been a wild couple of weeks since posting the Lucifer episode. I'm pretty excited with how that turned out. Everything considered, I think we had a pretty good run. It was one of those things where, it took me a few days to write it, and to quote Fry from Futurama, or paraphrase him at the very least, I felt like it should have taken me a few days to read it, but hey, it wasn't as long as I anticipated, and I do want to do more extensive research on demons, monsters, old gods that appear throughout the Bible, and things that appear as monsters throughout our existence. But today, I have something pretty different for us to cover, because I received a bunch of propaganda from a variety of sources, and I want to share some of that with you. First of all, I received a letter from our local Jehovah's Witnesses, and if you're not familiar, the Jehovah's Witnesses are a church that require a certain amount of proselytizing. They tend to go door to door, and they want to read you something or give you information, typically something from the Watchtower organization. That's the basically the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They want to bring you into the fold so you can understand their concept of faith and what they would call the true God, Jehova God. Jehova being the way they interpret the otherwise interpreted Yahweh as the name of God. Anyway, if you are unaware, the town I live in has a Jehovah Witnesses Kingdom Hall, and we also have a Seventh-day Adventist church, so we have a lot of variety when it comes to Christianity and its sects. We have Methodists and Catholics as well, but what's interesting about things like the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witness in specific is that they're end times religions. They actually stem from organizations that began in New York in an area called the Burned Over District, which if you want to know more about the origins of the Jehovah's Witnesses, look up Telltale Atheist. He's got a lot of great information over there, Owen does. And if you want to learn more about the Burned Over District and all the things that came out of it, including Mormonism, check out Naked Mormonism. It'll really help you out. But when it comes to going door to door and proselytizing, the Jehovah's Witnesses, although kind of extreme and unusual, actually adhered to most CDC guidelines. They didn't meet in person here, especially during the depth of COVID, and they went out of their way to stay quiet and respectful of the boundaries that the world was putting up as we dealt with the pandemic. So only recently did they get back into meeting as a congregation, and only recently have they started proselytizing again. At least in my neck of the woods, of course. And what's interesting for me is my wife and I moved to this town when the pandemic was brand new, so there's no one around. No one got to proselytize to us, and I'm assuming they do their best to keep up with who's moving and who's moving in. I do know that they have sort of like local districts that they make sure they hit them every so many years. So we finally got something. We got a letter in the mail. If you're unaware, you can still be a good witness, even if you don't go door to door. You can find other ways to do your proselytizing, because if I recall correctly, they need to do about 20 hours a week, which is pretty intense. But this person was able to write a letter. I'm not going to name the person, but I want to read the letter and then describe a piece of paraphernalia, a piece of religious propaganda that was given to me, and then we'll move into something even more exciting. So here's the letter. Good morning. Have you ever wondered why the world today has brutal warfare, grinding poverty, shootings, crippling diseases, etc. God's Word, the Bible, reveals three main causes for human suffering. 1. Selfishness, greed, and hatred. 2. Time and unforeseen events. 3. The evil ruler of the world. The Bible clearly identifies Satan as the primary cause of human suffering. Please read the enclosed tract. Sincerely, a Jehovah's Witness near you. Now, they sent me a tract, and for a moment I was like, ooh, a chick tract! But no, that's not what it is. They sent me something from the JW organization, jw.org being their website for the Jehovah's Witnesses. And it says, who really controls the world? And it has an illustration of a globe on it. And it says, do you think it is God, humankind, or someone else? Now, weird questions laid out like that, that's going to be the crux of this episode. Things that have, like, unusual multiple choices. And in here it says, I'm just going to read to you the bullet points. Can we really believe what the Bible says? Yes, for at least three reasons, it claims. 1. Satan's rulership is doomed. Jehovah is determined to bring Satan's control over mankind to an end. He promises to bring, quote, nothing to the devil, and undo all the damages that Satan has caused. This is according to Hebrews 2:14 in the New World Translation. That seems to be the primary translation of the JWs, and I want you to take note of some of the themes going on as we go through the next two bullet points. 2. God has chosen Jesus Christ to rule the world. Jesus is the complete opposite of this world's present cruel, selfish ruler. Concerning Jesus' kingship, God promises that he will have pity on the lowly and the poor. From oppression and from the violence he will rescue them. Psalms 72:13 and 14. 3. God cannot lie. The Bible plainly states that it is impossible for God to lie. Hebrews 6:18. When Jehovah promises to do something, it is as good as done. Isaiah 55:10 and 11. The ruler of the world will be cast out. John 12:31. Now, when you pay close attention, one of the things I was hoping for you to hear is that they're making this broad claim that God and Jesus don't rule the world. And as someone who grew up Christian, Lutheran primarily, that's weird. I always thought they ruled the whole thing. And the only reason that I felt any pain or suffering was because I was ignoring them. I was not giving in to their rulership. However, this makes a broad claim that the one who controls the entire world is Satan himself, the one who was previously known as Lucifer, the being that fell for simply being beautiful and proud of it. Now, this would really fly in the face of what I think a lot of my Christian friends and relatives would agree with. They would definitely say that God rules, but this makes it seem as though God is just preparing us for his rule because he needs to defeat Satan, who is currently in control of the world. And I would love to see evidence for that, something that we could falsify, something that we could find evidence for or against. But this claim is so counter the claim of many of us around us that I think it really feeds into those with a conspiratorial mindset, especially those who may think that an election was rigged when the evidence points to the contrary. I think that's definitely the kind of mindset they're looking for. It doesn't hit me. It doesn't hit me so much because I don't live in as much fear. I respect that they sent this to me. It's a lovely card with flowers on it with the original handwriting from the witness, but I'm not the target audience for someone who's fearful enough to fall for that. Now, let's change gears. One of the other more interesting things that I've been able to experience is I got a bunch of propaganda from Ken Hamm's Ark Encounter. Now, if you don't know Ken Hamm, he runs a thing called Answers in Genesis, which owns the Ark Encounter Museum in Kentucky, and a lot of his propaganda is from there. What I was the recipient of was given to me at the Iowa State Fair. I was excited to walk into one of the big buildings there And I wanted to go see PBS because my wife and I had just visited the local PBS station. We wanted to see the booth at the fair. And across the hall, or the walkway from PBS, was a creationist exhibit. And the creationists had provided stuff from Ken Hamm's Ark Encounter Museum, which is a life-size, in giant air quotes, replica of the ark that Noah had supposedly built. And I say air quotes because we don't have any solid evidence that there was ever an ark or a worldwide flood, but we're going to table that for the time being. I was informed that the organization there wasn't actually the museum themselves. They were local creationists who were putting this on, and they've been putting it on for over 20 years, and they simply have stuff from Answers in Genesis now, so that's great. And everything's free, so I figure we can read some of it, just like the free stuff from the witnesses I got. There's some things I'm not going to touch on, so let's just get those off the table first. I've got a great pamphlet I want to cover, written by Ken Hamm, called The Purpose and Meaning of Life, From Creation to the Cross. It's got like hellfire on the front of it, and Jesus on the cross, nice bloody imagery, nice horrifying imagery. Gotta love that blood cult stuff, as Seth Andrews would say. And the other one is more whimsical. Looks like something you get at a New Age shop. It's blue and purple. It says, Is There Really a God? By Ken Hamm. And we're gonna cover those in the future, probably on the next episode. And then the big thing that I want to find special time to utilize is really boring looking. It's white. It has a green button on it, like you'd find on a computer screen. It says Begin. A Journey Through the Scriptures for Seekers and New Believers. I don't think this is actually by Ken Hamm, but this is basically like a starter Bible, or like a brief, truncated, annotated Bible, specifically for people who want to know what religion is about, but don't want any of those confusing points that things like Genesis have in them, where it tells the same story 2 times with different outcomes and different features, and it can frustrate somebody who's trying to look at it through a skeptical lens. So this takes out all those things that makes the Bible hard to believe in, I'm assuming. And I really want to dig into this, because one of the temptations I've had, and you know temptation is sin, and I love giving into my temptations, I would love to be able to create a Jacobson Bible, because that's my last name, and inspired by the Jefferson Bible. Thomas Jefferson had created a Bible that took out the magic, and I want to take out a Bible take a Bible and take out all the parts that are not only magical, so things that probably couldn't happen. I also want to take out all the things that are not justifiable and, what's the best word? Harmful. I want to take out all the harmful stuff. I think that would be really interesting. We'd have a really short Bible, and I think I'd have to run that by a few people. So the first thing I want to focus on is a narrative that I'm going to read to you. I'm going to read to you, and then I'm going to interrupt it. This is going to feel like you're watching a video by Gutsick Gibbon, so I hope she feels honored that I'm mentioning her in this information, should she ever find out. I always feel like I'm standing amongst all these greats like Forrest Valkai and Matt Dillahunty, or Shannon Q, and here I am just in the background doing my own shouting thing. But this is a tiny pamphlet called Stop Following Me. We Are Not Related. And it shows that progress of apes to man image that has been discounted as factual basically since its inception. It's an oversimplification of what representing evolution in primates would look like, but with like chimps, cavemen, and common man on it. And the man is turned around yelling at the apes. So I'm going to take a moment, and I'm going to read through this. I'm going to do the whole thing verbatim. It's frustrating, it's awful, and I only say that because I've had to read this already. But I'll stop periodically and answer some of the questions and see where we go. Here we are. Do you believe in evolution? Then here's an important question for you. Before we get to the question, let's look at 2 important definitions. 1. According to Science Daily, the scientific method is based on the collection of data through observation and experimentation. 2. Darwinian evolution is based on a change from one kind, or as Charles Darwin called it, a family, to another. For example, there's a feline kind, cats and tigers, a canine kind, wolves and dogs, a human kind, which is human beings, etc. I'm going to stop it there and say kind. We're talking about clades, we're talking about taxonomy, and the difficulty, I'm not a biologist. I'm going to say that right up front, but I understand taxonomy a little bit. And we've put literally hundreds, if not millions of hours into taking apart what we know and what we know things aren't. So categorizing creatures throughout our world. And we do this with minerals too, but we're looking at biological taxonomy, right? We're putting things in specific categories, and kind is not a part of our taxonomy, specifically because it just isn't functionally what we're looking for. Every time we gather evidence, we use the best framework we have, and whenever that framework is suspect to being improper or being unsubstantiated, we readdress that framework. And currently, what we have from anything from kingdom to species is functional. And it is simply a man-made construct in order for us to measure things, compare things, and contrast them, and puzzle out how things fit together and how things relate. Because it is very obvious through many things that we can actually observe, including DNA, that everything on this earth has more in common than we might want to admit. So let's get back to Ken Hamm's words. So here's a question. Can you name any observable evidence for Darwinian evolution that meets the requirements of the scientific method? Yes, we could see evolution in microorganisms, specifically bacteria. We could see evolution taking place in things like Darwin's finches. We've witnessed evolution take place across many smaller species that don't live as long as humans, specifically species that live very short lives compared to humans, because a human life has more of an opportunity and an ample chance to measure those changes over time. Now, I don't know if we have evidence of witnessed speciation, but I wouldn't doubt it. And it's never wrong to say you don't know. Something that can be observed directly, here and now, that doesn't require some element of blind faith. Perhaps you're thinking of Darwin's finches. We did. With different sized beaks that develop over time, but that's not molecules to man evolution. That's simply what's called natural selection, or adaptation, as different species of finches developed, depending on what combination of existing genetic information was most suitable in particular environments. Such adaptation happens everywhere in nature, but it's always within the limits set by genetic code, based on the information that's already contained within. Darwin's finches remain as finches. There's been no change of kind. Now that's interesting to say, because what we do understand about how traits disseminate through different generations and through communities, as far as I understand. If you're a scientist, ring me up and correct me. If you're my wife and you're a biologist, you can let me know in a future episode. We can break this down together. But to the best of my understanding is we have all of these different traits expressed through the information in our DNA that are carried by a mother and a father. Now, when those two things combine to create a new creature, an offspring, they retain certain pieces of information from both the mother and the father. And sometimes those pieces of information are lost because one is replaced by the other. And in other instances, some of that information is, I don't want to use the word corrupted, but changed. And that's how we see mutation. And the mutation is not always something obvious. It's not the X-Men. It's more subtle changes. And these things do change over time, because genetic code can change and fall away as things proceed, and sometimes we can be left with lots of code we don't need. Anyway, let's see where we go from here. Perhaps you would point to antibiotic resistance in bacteria as evidence of evolutionary changes, but such changes typically are the result of genetic loss, not the gain that is needed for the evolutionary process. That's interesting. He's going to leave out mutation entirely. Whether in birds or bacteria or any other form of life, there is no instance of brand new genetic information being added into the genetic code, which is required for molecules to man evolution to occur. Now, to bring up my wife one more time, I know she did research on corn where they were implanting information from another species into the corn itself. And that was done by implanting that information into yet another species, if I recall correctly, into some sort of bacteria, in order to test bed it. So there was definitely added information, and this can happen in the wild. One of the reasons we're able to harness it in laboratories is because we're aware that it can happen outside the laboratory. We may be able to speed things up or change the direction in a more dramatic sense, but that is adaptation. Returning to the text. There are fossils. You may line them up according to similarities and claim that they prove common descent, but that interpretation falls outside the realm of the observational science, because you cannot directly observe something that has happened in the past. It requires a measure of faith. On the contrary, Ken Hamm, I can observe the past. I can do it anytime I look outside at night, because witnessing the stars, knowing that the speed of light has a given rate, a rate that we can measure, that I can't remember off the top of my head, and I don't want to clickety-clack and look it up, but the speed of light is a specific rate, and so we know that it takes time for that light to travel to our eyes. So anytime we look through a telescope into something beautiful, like looking at a nebula through the James Webb Space Telescope, we're looking at the past. So we can indeed observe the past, and we can also make inferences about the past based on things we understand that are happening now and around us. Back to the text. Darwinian evolution doesn't pass a test for the scientific method. It is unobservable. Darwinian evolution is therefore not scientific. If you find that hard to believe, then go to evolutionversusgod.com and watch evolutionary scientists at USC and UCLA as they were unable to provide answers to the same question. Sometimes the best answer, Ken, is I don't know. Anyway, where were we? Their evolutionary belief ultimately rests on nothing but blind faith. It can be confirmed by observational science. He says it cannot be confirmed. Despite knowing this, many still cling to the idea of evolution, for reasons which we will look at shortly. The biblical creation model, on the other hand, can be confirmed by the observational science. You can observe every animal bringing forth after its own kind, as it says in Genesis, which is fascinating because we can't observe who wrote Genesis or know for a fact that it was written by Moses himself. I believe that's who they claim wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, right? The Pentateuch? Alright, let's keep going. Despite their tremendous variety, God programmed into their DNA, enabling creatures to become adapted to their environments. Dogs remain dogs, cats remain cats, etc. Nothing changes kinds throughout the 1.4 million different species of animals, birds, insects, and fish that is observable both in fossil record and in the living world today. Certain similarities we observe in fossils of different kinds are actually evidence of a common creator. Which is very fascinating to say that, like, vestigial bones of a whale are evidence of God. It's really fascinating. The purpose of telling you these things is to bring up 2 important points. First, if naturalistic evolution is true and there is no God, then we are just animals with no moral responsibility. Pause. Giant pause. There's always this concept of objective morality, and I'm just going to pump those brakes and say for certain, in my best understanding of the world, that all morality, especially morality handed down by a God, is indeed subjective. And the reason I say this is because if God, the God of the Bible, says today, "Thou shalt not kill," then we say that that is morally just. God said that that is what we do, and that is morally true. But if the next day God says, "Those people over there, like the Philistines, are filthy, and they've done horrible things, go murder them all," then killing them is morally just. It is subjective on the whims of the being. So to say that it is objective is incredibly infuriating to me, because all of our moral systems have existed through a subjective lens. But here's where objectivity comes into play. To paraphrase Matt Dillahunty, just like the rules of chess have been laid out by a person, laid out by people who've agreed upon these rules, once the rules are agreed upon, once the framework is set down in a way that we all say, okay, these are the rules of chess, we can then look at them objectively and make new subjective inferences on the objective rules that were laid out for the game chess. Now, what's interesting to see is that throughout human society, it has become apparent that we have great advantages to laying out rules. Like, you know what, let's not kill each other. I don't want to die, you don't want to die, let's not kill one another. These rules can extrapolate throughout society and be something as simple as, "Thou shalt not turn right on red." Can't make a right turn on a red light, right? And once we've written that, once the city, the community, the organization of humans have said, you cannot turn right on red, then that is an objective rule, an objective law, a piece of what we would consider morality, whether or not you think it's good or bad. And that's the interesting thing, is once these rules have been laid out, we can begin to criticize them. We can begin to make subjective cases on them. We can begin to use other objective frameworks to also criticize and stretch these rules until we can maybe make up a new one that says, hey, what? As long as you stopped, then you can turn on red. these sorts of things can change all the time. And that's because once we create something and we agree on it, then it gains some objectivity. Doesn't matter who says it, God or anyone else. And I realize that that's a really strong opinion for a podcast that's trying to deconstruct things, but that is the most reasonable outcome that I can come to. If you need to challenge me on that, then I understand. But I'm gonna finish this pamphlet here, because it's just frustrating. There is no ultimate morality other than what society says is right and wrong. That means pornography is okay, as is fornication, lust, adultery, and homosexual behavior. My. Anything goes as long as society says it's okay. That's good news for red-blooded human beings with raging hormones. It's really a strong incentive for clinging to the belief in evolution and wanting it to be true. Second, and more importantly, if molecules demand evolution is false and the Bible is right about our Creator, then we aren't just animals with primal instincts. We are human beings made in the image of God with a unique sense of justice and a God-given unique sense of right and wrong. If the Bible is right, then heaven and hell exist, and it is possible to experience the free gift of everlasting life with our Creator. I'm gonna stop it here. This pamphlet, specifically the one called "Stop Following Me," really frustrates me because ultimately it leads to this whole thing of like, if you don't believe in my specific Sky Daddy who really, really wants you to behave in a certain way, even though he behaves like a Lifetime movie bad guy, you know, that boyfriend who's super controlling and now you have to kill him. Otherwise, he's going to lock you in the basement and set you on fire, as I've heard people like Seth Andrews say. Like, it's frustrating. He makes a lot of unfounded claims, and there's just this... Ken Hamm is very good at delivering things in a sense of like, I am always intellectually and morally superior to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the final thing that Ken Hamm has been so kind to give me, and give me many of, because I took a handful, I took 4 of them, are called atheist tests. Now, I was going to read this out loud, and I still think that there's some value in that, but I am working to get in touch with someone who actually creates surveys. I want to make a better version of an atheist survey, an atheist test, if you will, because this is really, it uses the same verbiage that Ken Hamm likes to use. It's like, you know, you're either smart or you're stupid or you have a secret evil reason. That's basically everything that he talks about. It's kind of like what I was referencing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, where it's like, was it made by God or made by us or some evil reason? And that, like, it's frustrating. But one of the things that I think is wonderful about these is they're actually comics in a sense, and they're illustrated pretty well. He got someone who can draw really nicely. And it puts forth arguments that a biologist could poke holes in, and an architect could poke holes in. It's really fascinating, and the reason I grabbed a bunch of these is if you want to hit me up on Twitter, I'd be more than happy to mail you one of these. I would like it to be a private message, if possible, because I don't want your information to get out into the world. But if you want an atheist test straight from Ken Hamm, I'll send you one. Hell, if you want Stop Following Me, I've only got one copy, I'll send it to you. I'd also be willing to send everything but the book Begin, because I really need that. But I wanted to share some of this information that gets sent out into the world, because it's really easy to read this and go, oh yeah, you're right, especially when it speaks from a place of authority, and it speaks in a place of intellectual superiority. It can be easy to be like, hey, this thing that was written by Ken Hamm, if I don't agree with him, then I'm dumb. He even goes out of his way to say, if I don't agree with him, I might be a fool. Well, I clearly am not hiding an ulterior motive, and I don't want to be a fool. So I just want to say I agree with him. And I don't want anyone to feel threatened by someone coming from a place of implied superiority, because no one is superior to you. And one of the things that I think is really important when we're deconstructing stuff like this is to notice what they're giving for sources and do our due diligence to research these sources. I don't think specifically Ken Hamm comes from a place that is trying to better the world. But when I look at what the Jehovah's Witnesses sent me, I think that this person who wrote this letter took their time, and I do think that they care, and I do think that they might believe what they're sending me. even though it's threatening. The Jehovah's Witnesses information threatens me with God because I might be in league with the devil. But I do think they care. So looking at both of them, it's good to set it down and say, what are the goals of the people who put this together? You can say that about anything, even like a journal like Science or Nature. And then you can look at how they cite things. And where do they want me to find my information? And how do they want me to compare this? How do they want me to compare this to other information? I don't think I'm going to edit that out. I burped a little, but it's just really, it's really uniquely frustrating, and it scares me because I don't want someone to think that they're a fool or evil for disagreeing. Never be afraid to disagree. This has been Fables of Our Deconstruction. Fables of Our Deconstruction is created by me, Dylan Jacobson. Please like and review Fables wherever you get your podcasts, and join my community, the Brimstone Order, at patreon.com/Dylan. That's DYLAN. It extremely helps out. I'm putting out episodes a day early over there, and I often release all my other artwork over there. If you didn't get an opportunity to see, I did a bunch of cool sidewalk chalk art, actually on asphalt, and things like Patreon help it become possible for me to do stuff like that. I also want to thank Apes of the State for the use of their song Moments a Year From Now as my intro and outro. And remember, you're never alone. We are in this together.
And I wonder what I'm doing at this moment that